I'm going to be going through the Gear Hub tier by tier from a free-to-play perspective, telling you all of the mechs and weapons that you should and should not get, along with how to best set up your hangar for each tier. Anyway, yeah, leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more of this type of thing. Let's get started. Tier 1, obviously, Paragon and Lancer are both in the tutorial, as well as Autocannon 4 and RPG 2. I think technically you can skip the tutorial and not get Lancer or RPG, but it doesn't really matter. So just get Thermal Lance 2 because it's the most effective and cheapest one. Tier 1, your hangar will look like this. Just ignore the mods, I'll talk about that at the end of the video. In Tier 2, your priority in terms of mechs are Slingshot and then Juggernaut. Juggernaut you should only get if there's the 50 A-coin task, which will give you 5 more A-coins than it costs. Juggernaut only costs 45, it'll give you 50, so that's just a net profit on your end. But then otherwise, MD is the other mech you should get just for progression. I would avoid Puma, but I mean, it's pretty cheap, so like it wouldn't be a huge deal. In terms of weapons, your priority is Shotgun 4. You will also want to get RPG 6, Plasma Cannon 4 and 6, Long Arm 8, and Javelin Rack 4. I would avoid all Gauss Rifle energy variants. Even if it's cheaper than it was, it's not a good weapon, and it still costs, all of them cost 8 coins. It's not worth the price point. And you should be able to get into Tier 3 without getting Shotgun 8 either. Tier 1 and 2, you can do pretty much whatever you want without any major consequence. Just don't rank up any of the mechs because they're not going to be usable, like even 2 tiers down the road. Tier 2, your hangar should look something like this. The yellow or blue on the mech indicates whether or not that mech itself is necessary to have, and then the yellow or blue on the weapon indicates whether or not that weapon is necessary to use on that mech specifically. But in this case, it's nothing really major. You could get away with using pretty much anything. Tier 3 in terms of mechs, your priority is Ares. You should already have Guardian for free from the promo code, but if not, then go ahead and buy that as well. I would strictly avoid Shadow. It might not be that expensive, but it's a very bad mech, honestly. In terms of weapons, your priority is Ember Gun 6, but you will also want to get Fragment Gun 6, Long Arm 10, Pulse Cannon 6 and 8, as well as Cryo Launcher 6. The Long Arm and the Pulse Cannons are just for the sake of progression. You will probably not use any of them, but they are a cheap way to get tier stars. Also, the Cryo Launcher 6, you could decide to get Missile Rack 6 instead. That's kind of your own choice. I personally prefer Cryo Launcher 6 because then you can use it with the 10 later on. Some weapons I would strictly avoid are anything that costs you A-coins, really, as well as Arc Torrent 6. A lot of people are going to get this, but it's not a good long-term weapon. There's nothing you can pair it with down the line that costs credits. All of the future variants cost A-coins, and also Arc Torrent is not very good. It's immediately overshadowed by Ember Gun, and arguably worse than Fragment Gun as well. A lot of players will rank up Guardian or Ares. Don't do that. Ares is completely overshadowed by Aegis in Tier 5 to a point where Ares is basically unusable, and Guardian in general is not something that stays very strong for very long, though it is, of the two, the better option if you were going to rank up one of them. Tier 3, your hangar should look something like this. Once again, ignore the mods, I'll talk about that later. And for the most part, all of these builds are not like super necessary. You could mess around and use a lot of different things and still do fine. Moving into Tier 4, you should get Arachnos from the Derby event if you have it, but if not, go ahead and get it for credits. You can get Stalker or Tengu if you want. I would only get one of them. But in general, you should be able to use promo codes or even the daily login reward to get one or both of them. So I would not recommend spending A-coins on it. In terms of weapons, this is where you're going to start seeing the legendary ones. These are very, very expensive, but they're also very good. Your top priority in terms of weapons are Stormwrack 6 and Revoker 6. I would recommend getting Stormwrack first because you are not, at this point in time, going to have any mech that's able to actually make great use out of Revokers. You may also get Stasis Beam 8 for free at rank 3. That's more free tier stars. Anything that you can get for free, go ahead and do that. Even if it's not good, it's a free way of getting tier stars, essentially. But apart from those, you will want to get Ember Gun 8, Helix Rack 8, and if you need to, Fragment Gun 8 as well. Quantum Gun 8 and Disruptor 6 are a couple weapons that don't do terribly bad. They should not replace Stormwrack or Revoker, but they're decent weapons if you want to get one or both of them. Otherwise, I would highly recommend staying away from, once again, any weapon that costs you A-coins. At this point, you're actually maybe going to have a decent stockpile of A-coins because you're getting through these first 4 tiers spending pretty much none. But this is by design. You absolutely should not be spending them yet. You're going to need quite a lot, about 4,000 in tier 5, so save as many as you can. But I would also avoid weapons like Voltaic RPG is very, very bad, as well as Particle Beam, Repeater, and Chain Gun. All of those weapons do very, very poorly, even though they do cost credits. Between Stalker and Tengu, I would say that Tengu performs better individually, but it has a more aggressive playstyle that other mechs in later tiers just do a lot better. So between them, I would actually say Stalker's probably the one that you should go for, if at all. Tier 4, your hanger should look something like this. Once again, the weapon necessity is indicative of whether or not it's necessary to use on that mech specifically. I will always have you using the best weapons on the best mechs, just in general, because that is what works the best. And just ignore the mods. I have them in here just because I couldn't be bothered to take them off, but I'll talk about that later. Tier 5, in terms of mechs, your priority is Aegis. This is the utmost priority. This is what you're going to need those A-coins for. But you'll also want to get Zephyr, which is credits. That's pretty cheap. And you can get Redeemer if you want, but that's kind of up to you. It does cost a lot of A-coins, and you will need those A-coins in tier 6. So it really just kind of depends how long you end up in tier 5. Saving up all those credits for other things. If you end up with a lot of A-coins, then you can feel free to spend it on Redeemer. But I would strictly avoid Cheetah. Cheetah is very bad. In terms of weapons, your top priority is Pod Gun 8. Other weapons that you should get are the other 2 Barrage, being Nade Launcher 10 and Cryo Launcher 10. This is where that Cryo Launcher 6 from earlier might come in handy, as well as Disc Launcher 8, which is optional. You could choose to get Viper 8 instead. A lot of people do, but I think Disc Launcher is better. And Quantum Gun 10. The Quantum Gun 10 is solely for the purpose of progression. You're not actually going to use it. If you get Redeemer, then you can just skip this. Once again, weapons that I would avoid are any weapons that cost A-coins in this tier. None of them are worth it. As a general rule of thumb, there are no 6 or 8 energy weapons that are worth spending A-coins on as a free-to-play player. And though there are certainly in tier 5 a few weapons that are higher than 8 energy, like Arctorrent 10, Ember Gun 10, I would still not recommend getting them. They're lower grade, which means that they perform generally worse. Also, it will be tempting to get Fragment Gun 12 specifically, because it's very cheap. I think I ended up doing this on my free-to-play account as well, but ultimately it's just a waste. It's not usable at this stage of the game. It might not cost much, and you might think that it's cheap tier stars, but you're going to have to get one of these other things anyway, so it's essentially just money down the hole. Tier 5, your hanger should look something like this. The Podgun Aegis is absolutely crucial. I would absolutely put that together first and keep it for as long as possible. Stormracks on Aegis also work pretty well, but Podgun is better, I think. The same thing kind of goes with Zephyr. Stormracks on Zephyr do work well, but the Revoker is just going to work significantly better, and none of the other mechs can really make great use out of Revoker. The Stormracks, I would recommend putting on Ares and not Guardian, just because the Ares can actually take a hit, like at least one hit with the shield, so it's able to expose itself with a little bit less consequence for that reason. Otherwise, you can do pretty much whatever you want with the last 2 builds. Moving on to tier 6, your top priority in terms of mechs is Orion, but you will also want to get Panther and Killshot. If you already got Redeemer from tier 5, then you can go ahead and skip Killshot. It's not totally necessary. But in general, I would say Killshot's better than Redeemer, so between the two, I would recommend not getting Redeemer and getting Killshot in tier 6 instead. You will be very tempted to get Sentinel, because once again, it is cheap, it costs credits, and you'll be able to afford it rather quickly, but it's not effective. You won't be able to use it, and if you just want cheap progression, you can spend those credits on a weapon, and you'll be able to save like 100,000 credits or something like that. In terms of weapons, your priority is Stormwrack 10 specifically. Your next priority is Revoker 10. Again, I would get the Stormwrack first. The Stormwrack versus Revoker question is kind of its own thing, and maybe I'll make a video on that specifically, but in general, I recommend people getting Stormwrack first. But along with that, you will also want to get Graviton Beam 10, which is specifically good on Panther, and Voltaic RPG 14. The Voltaic RPG is just for the sake of progression. You could get Sentinel instead, it would be a little bit more costly, and maybe you'd use Sentinel sometimes, but it's very doubtful. And between the two, you may as well just go for the one that's cheaper. You could decide to go for Podgun 10 instead of Graviton Beam 10. That is a valid option as well, but I do think especially on Panther, the Graviton Beam 10 is probably a slightly better option. Once again, I will have to remind you that cheaper does not mean better, so weapons like Repeater 10, Chain Gun 10, and Particle Beam 10, they all cost credits and might be cheaper than certain other things, but they are very, very bad weapons. They will not work well for very long, if at all, and the only way to maintain them would be to spend a lot of resources or spend real money to either get them early on or to keep upgrading them. This is where a lot of your A-coins are going to go, and this is the reason that I have you try to avoid A-coin-based items during the earlier tiers, because you will be spending quite a lot here, and it'll just save you some time if you can get the credit stuff instead. Between Panther, Aegis, and Orion, you will use one of those mechs after you're in tier 8 and you get Hemlock and Nomad. One of these epic mechs will remain, and you should figure out which one you want that to be as soon as possible so that you can keep from upgrading the ones that aren't going to stay long term. Tier 6, your hanger should look something like this. I do have disc launchers on the Panther. That's if you didn't manage to rank up and duplicate your Graviton 10s. But otherwise, keeping the Aegis as it was, keeping the Zephyr as it was, and migrating your Stormwracks over to Orion is the optimal way to go about that. And then for that last build, you can just fill it with whatever it is that you have that actually works, essentially. Moving into tier 7, this is the primary goal for most people for the Gear Hub, and this is mostly what I've engineered this guide to be, is to get you from point A to point B being Surge and Eclipse. These are your priorities. Which one you go for first is dependent on what kind of situation you're in. You can watch this video in the top right if you want to figure out which mech is better to get first for you specifically, but you should absolutely get both of them. They both cost lots of A-coins, so that's going to take a long time. You'll be tempted to get Brick House, but it's not very good. It costs a lot of credits, and you probably won't use it, to be completely honest. You should absolutely avoid Redox and Scorpius. They are both very, very bad mechs. So if you spend A-coins on that, then that's just like a lot of time down the drain. In terms of weapons, this is where you stop prioritizing Stormwrack and start to prioritize Revoker. So you should get Revoker 12 first, and then go for Stormwrack 12 after that. You will also want to get Fusion Cannon 16, Helix Rack 16, Cryo Launcher 16, and Stasis Beam 16. All 4 of those are simply for the tier stars. You're not going to use any of those things, but it is cheaper to buy the lower grade items. You could get Minigun 12 while you're in this tier. You're going to be in this tier for a very long time anyway. It is a very, very good weapon, but it's also very expensive, and in general, I would actually say that it's worth getting, but only after you get to tier 8 and get the stuff from tier 8. It's one of those things that you can just come back to later. You don't necessarily have to get it while you're here. Most of the other weapons that are in this tier for A-coins are not very good. Carbine, Viper, Particle Beam, Repeater, EM Rifle Railgun, Disc Launcher, etc. They don't do very well at this stage of the game. I did say to get Disc Launcher 8 in Tier 5, and it's really good early on, but at this point, it's not going to be doing very well, so I would not get it. You could get Podgun 12 if you're still using the Podgun 8s or 10s, but I would put that on low priority. At this point, you're just going to be spending a lot of Acorns. You're going to be spending a lot of time, a lot of Acorns, kind of really fleshing out your hangar and making sure that it looks the best as possible before you get to Tier 8. This is the point where I would start getting better pilots. I think up until Tier 7, getting 1 or 2 epics is a good idea, but you should wait to buy legendary pilots until after you have either Surge or Eclipse, or both, to be honest. The same thing goes with implants. Just use what you have, don't buy implants. None of them are worth that kind of price point. Even the epic ones you might be tempted to because it's 600 Acorns. It's kind of cheap, but it's like at most a 10% stat difference. You're going to want to wait till, again, you have at very least one of the 2 legendary scout mechs, because they do make that much of a difference. The difference is massive. But you will stay in Tier 7 for a very, very long time, especially trying to save up all the Acorns necessary to get the good stuff, using that time to upgrade and rank up Surge or Eclipse, or even some of your weapons like Revoker 12, ranking up Revoker 10, Stormrack 10, Stormrack 12, or whichever of the epic mechs you plan to use long term. But I will say, you will end up with a lot of extra credits, because you're going to be mostly spending Acorns in this tier. What I would warn against, though, is spending credits for the sake of spending credits. So if you're not going to be upgrading something meaningful, I would not recommend spending credits on any type of upgrades. One of the major reasons for that is actually for legendary pilots, because every now and again, there are crate rush events for legendary pilots that you can usually get with credits for about 1.2 million. So I would recommend having at least that much on you at all times, if at all possible. So in general, yeah, it's just a nice way of doing that. And also, it keeps you from having to spend Acorns on those legendary pilots as well. Between Surge and Eclipse, whichever one you like best should get the double Revoker 10s. Panther should not get Stormrack unless you have a legendary reload implant. And obviously, if you plan to replace it, then don't rank it up and don't use Stormrack 12s on it. Tier 7, your hangar should look something like this. The better Revokers should go on the mech that you prefer. Right here, I do have them on Surge, and then your slightly more mismatched Revokers will go on the other one. Keeping the Aegis as it was, keeping the Orion as it was. At this point, you could swap the Aegis and Orion builds if you wanted to, but then for Panther, it's really just whatever weapon that you have that you're able to equip. Tier 8 is the last tier, and in terms of mechs, you're going to want to get Hemlock as your top priority. It is very cheap, so that is very fortunate, cost credits, and Nomad is the other mech that you should go for. Bastion, Gatecrasher, and Onyx all perform very, very poorly and all cost Acorns, so I would not get any of them. But if you were going to get one, I would go for Bastion out of the 3. And in terms of weapons, the only thing you're really looking at is Stormrack 16, which again, very cheap, which is nice. Revoker 16, depending on what kind of situation your scouts are in. And possibly Minigun 16 if you decided to keep Panther in your hangar and wanted to go for a minigun build. But in general, you could probably skip that. And that's about it. Nothing else is really worth your Acorns or your time. Stormrack and Revoker, as you might imagine, are the 2 top weapons. Minigun being the 3rd best weapon, but again, it's very expensive. And so long as you can fill the gaps with Stormrack and Revoker, there's kind of no reason to get it. Otherwise, Podgun is probably the 5th best weapon in the game, only slightly beaten out by Strike Rocket. But that finishes Tier 8, and finishes the entirety of the Gear Hub. At the end of Tier 8, your hangar should look something like this. Once again, the necessity of the mechs are marked. All of these mechs are very necessary, except for the epic one. That's just whichever epic one that you want to use. It's just whichever one does the best for you. And then once again, the necessity marking on the weapon is an indicator of how necessary it is on that specific mech, not just how necessary the weapon is in general. So Surgeon Nomad almost exclusively only work well with close quarters, so Revoker is very necessary on those. Eclipse and Orion, or whatever other epic mech you might be using, could use some other things. Hemlock is very, very good with Stormrack, although late game, to be honest, most people end up migrating their Stormracks over to better things, and they end up using a pod gun Hemlock. So putting that together for a long-term thing is also not the worst idea. Now in terms of mods, it's honestly pretty simple. Basically treat it the same as rank ups. Focus on your best mechs first, and obviously don't put mods on mechs that you don't plan on using long-term. You could choose to stack all of your mods on one mech, or you could choose to distribute them a little bit more evenly. It's kind of up to you in terms of how you do it. Sometimes the matchmaking will think that your entire hangar is a bit stronger than it is if you have one build that has like a lot of mods on it. So maybe not fully stacking on one mech, but prioritizing one or two mechs over the rest is probably a good idea. I would start with perimeter multilayer on everything, and then only upgrade that before even considering buying any of the other mods. But this final hangar is very close to the top meta, the only differences being that Deathwalker would replace the Epic Mech, and Lacewing would replace either Nomad or Hemlock, depending on your playstyle. Anyway, that is going to be it for this video. When new items come out, or when things change in terms of free-to-play, then I will add cards to the top right with videos along with a playlist at the end, so that you can see everything that has changed. If you're starting from scratch, there are special download links that will give you a specific advantage when you're starting a new account, so if you're looking to do that, you can find those links along with all of the current valid promo codes in the description of this video. Anyway, that will be it from me. Appreciate y'all. Take care.